Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. For this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I made this cake using a matching stencil and impression mat by Angela Morrison. Her stuff is fantastic. I love how you can have matching things that are different techniques. And I went ahead and used the same texture mat to make these textured wafer paper petals. So we're going to make those first. And I'm just using 0 grade wafer paper and simply just cutting paper or petal shapes. Doesn't matter if they're all the same size or not. This is an abstract design. I'm not making a rose. So just as long as you're doing 2 of them at the same time, cutting at the same time, just, line up 2 pieces of paper together and cut them at the same time. And I'm using wafer paper conditioner, which I will leave the recipe in the video description, with some yellow petal dust in it. That's how I'm coloring these petals. I just put some cornstarch on the mat, and I'm just using a makeup sponge to press the wafer paper into the mat. And the sponge is dipped in cornstarch also. And take note that I'm doing 2 petals with floral wire in between them. And just using the brush to just kind of disperse that color around, or that conditioner around. And that conditioner, what it will do is it's sticking the paper together, but when it dries, it will still be somewhat flexible, which is really nice. So you can kind of manipulate these, and I'll show you how I did that at a later time also, further on down in this video. So I just left those to dry overnight. You have to let them dry overnight. And now for that middle little small tier, it's kind of like a separator tier. It is made out of cake, but it's smaller in diameter than top and the bottom. I'm just using fondant colored yellow. I wanted to use the yellow and the blue again. I really like that color combination. I think it's really bright and springy and eye-catching. So I just put a little shortening actually on this fondant before I pressed it into the mat. Yes, shortening instead of cornstarch, because this fondant was really kind of tight, kind of firm. Even though I was warming it up in the microwave, I believe that part of the fondant that I used had some tylose in it from a previous project. So it was really hard to kind of press into that mat. And if I used cornstarch, it was not accepting the impression. So I used shortening to get it to kind of stick to the mat. But this foam that the mat's made out of, the fondant didn't stick to it anyways. I'm telling you, check out Angela Morrison. She has all kinds of products. And she does beautiful work too. Sorry, I can't say enough good about her. And now I'm just cutting it down to size. I had measured the height and the circumference of that cake, and I am cutting it down so it'll wrap around with a little bit of extra. And I think it was basically exactly the height I needed it, because I did not have that much fondant. So I had to make it stretch. And I'm using just shortening. I'm just brushing on shortening. And when you use these pastry brushes, make sure that sometimes they lose bristles. They're great for spreading product on there, the shortening, but sometimes they lose their bristles. So just make sure you're keeping an eye on that. I'm doing the paneling method, the upside down paneling method. And I like to do that so that you get that sharp corner on the top. The cake is upside down at this point, but I'm going to turn it right side up once I have removed the extra fondant. And since it was firmer, I didn't have to put it in the refrigerator to firm up for me to cut off the excess. It was that firm that I was able to just cut it off at this point. And then we're going to flip it back over and wait to assemble it with the rest of the 2 tiers. But of course, we need to make sure that our top is meeting up to the side. And there you can see the pattern. Now, if you want to bring out that pattern more, you could kind of brush the high points with some gold. I just didn't decide to do that this time. But you could. And the high points weren't really that high because of the stiffness, the tightness of it. So it might have actually become a mess. And now our top and our bottom tiers are basically the same size. I believe these were 4 layers, 7-inch cakes, I believe. And that middle one is a 4-inch, that smaller one. So they're already crumb coated and frosted and set up in the refrigerator. Or the freezer. Freezer 10 minutes, refrigerator 20 minutes is all it takes. And then I'm just used some pins to secure my stencil onto the cake. You don't have to do that. The stencil came with the pinholes in it already, so I wanted to use them. And I applied it at an angle and then remove the excess. I kind of wish I had removed a little bit more of the excess, but I didn't want to remove too much of that blue. So it still looked good. And once our petals were dry, I'm just using my clothing steamer to add a little bend to them. Not to necessarily make them wet again, just damp enough. I almost said the M word people don't like. Damp enough to be able to manipulate them. But you have to hold them in place, and see how I'm holding them in place until they dry. And then I just set those aside until I was ready to put them on the cake. And now we're just doing the reversed diagonal on, actually, this is the top tier. The other one was the bottom. I'm sorry. I had them angled so that the point is in between. The bottom point, kind of, you know what I'm saying. You saw it at the beginning. And now we have our stencils done. I'm just adding some straws for support. They are all three cut to the same size, the same height. Add a little buttercream, and then put your middle tier on. Now make sure that you put some support straws in this one also. I did 4 on this one. A little bit more buttercream, and then add your top tier. Now, since this might be somewhat of a nightmare to deliver if you don't add a skewer down the middle. This is about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit larger than that skewer that I have sharpened with a pencil sharpener so that it can go straight through all the cakes. This was not for an order, but if it had been for an order, there would have been a cake drum on the bottom, which is about 1/2 an inch thick. And I would pound that skewer all the way through that also to add that extra little bit of security. Then I just filled the hole in the top. I had cut the skewer, the dowel, we'll call it a dowel, about 1 to 2 inches shorter than the entirety of the cake so that I could sink it in and then filled it in with buttercream. And here I'm just assembling our petals. I kind of wanted to go with kind of a cascade effect. I wanted them to kind of follow the line of the diagonal of the stencil. So I'm just using floral tape, and I'm just kind of staggering them. You wrap the floral tape down a little bit, then you add a petal. Then you wrap it down a little bit more, and then you add another petal. Because if you wrap them all together at the same height, you're just going to end up with just kind of like a bouquet of petals, all the same height. But I wanted to have them be kind of more this abstract design. So once you have them on there, and make sure you leave enough of the wire sticking out, not taped down, so that you can move them around. You can see that there is some space, maybe about 1 inch, 1.5 inches between the bottom of the petal and where it's attached to the main center part of that swag. That allows you wiggle room. Then I'm adding some artificial flowers with some buttercream. And then just edging it out with, there's got to be gold involved, right? Has to be gold. The last one that I did that was the yellow and the blue was that fondant image transfer with the tiles. And I didn't add gold. And kind of glad I didn't, because there is another cake designer on Instagram whose work is very similar. We're very similar in our styles. Fancy Cakes by Pooja, I think is how you say it. And we both did one of those tile cakes at the same time. She added gold and I didn't. Kind of glad I didn't, because, that was intentional, but it kept them separate. So it didn't look like either one of us should just exactly copy the other one. So here's our final cake, guys. I really love the play of the different colors and the different textures. And I hope you liked it too. Hope, as always, that you got something out of it, that you learned something, that you had maybe some questions answered, and that you can use some of these techniques on your own. So we'll catch you next time.